I do care what you do with this information because it is important to our survival as a species. It's important to our planet. It is important for the world.
I felt that it was necessary for me to make a video which would chronicle the use of corporate logos, where these logos, these symbols, ultimately originate from, and what their ultimate meaning is. Most people today don't realize that they live in a world where they are surrounded by many symbols which have in the past, and I believe still currently, have very complex, esoteric meanings to people. And to the average person, this may seem as a subject which is not important, a subject which really does not need to be addressed. But I think that I can show you in the following video that there is a very complex design in our society, and the ultimate design is meant to keep you in a state of perpetual disinformation. So what I am going to suggest in this video is that there may be certain elements within our government and perhaps in the media, the mainstream media, and even perhaps in certain corporations, and that some of these particular elements are working toward a specific agenda, but in the meantime they are continually indoctrinating us and desensitizing us to what these symbols mean and what their ultimate agenda may be. I would simply suggest that there may be something going on behind the scenes, quote unquote, that you have no idea about. So the purpose of this video is to attempt to shed some light on some of the mystery which could be contained in some of these symbols. Many of the concepts and ideas which I present in this video will be simply dismissed as mere coincidence or happenstance. And for many people, this will be enough to help them to simply forget about what is being presented here. But I would challenge the viewer with this question. Does evil exist in this world? And are there people in history who have attempted to manipulate masses of people in order to achieve their own personal agenda? Think about that as you view this video. What I have done in this video is categorized all of the logos and symbols so that we can easily identify each corporate's logo and then correlate that logo to another known esoteric symbol, because I think what we will discover together is that many of the corporate's logos are actually based upon esoteric symbology that you find in the occult. So for that reason, I have categorized all of the logos. The first category, which we will start with, is logos that deal with the infamous number 666. On your screen now, you will notice that I have taken the picture of a website and the product which they were selling on this website. It's from the Monticello Drug Company, which is a company that has been around for many, many decades. The cold product shown here is 666 cold preparation, and I have to wonder why someone would use this number, this infamous number, in the name of their product. Here you will see another product from the very same company, and again we find them using this same number. It's very odd that they use this number in many of their products, as you will soon see. Now we will look at symbols briefly, which represent the Ouroboros. In alchemy, the Ouroboros represents cycles of time, or perhaps a rebirth, one might say. And that's important to represent if that's something that you believe in, a returning back to the one, back to the beginning. And if you believe in a world government, then you will also realize that many times throughout history there has been a recreation of humanity and civilization, and I believe that this is represented in this symbol. This is not all. This is only part one of understanding corporate logos. Please check out the other videos. You may find them informative, and it may change the way you look at the world around you. Thanks for watching. Congratulations, you have found part 2 of understanding corporate logos. In the first video, part 1, we discussed logos which contain the number 666, and we also examined corporate logos which contain the Ouroboros symbol, or at least seem to. And that symbol in itself is very interesting because it represents cycles of time. And if you are a student of history, one thing that you will understand right away is that world history has always seen a predominance of world empires which were funded by those with greater wealth than you and I would have. And so I believe that perhaps when we look at some of these corporate logos and we see that representation of the Ouroboros, then it shouldn't be difficult for us to understand that perhaps some of these corporations are funding a rebirth, funneling their money into high places to finance certain political figures. That is simply a guess. It is an opinion of mine, and you may not share that opinion. But let us simply look at these logos and decide for yourself. Could it be that there is something going on in secret, behind closed doors, that you and I know nothing about, except to say that it may be seen in some of the logos which corporations use today? Next, we will look at the symbol which corporations and other entities use, which is called the cloven hoof. In certain circles, the cloven hoof is a representation of Satan. So, that being the case, we can begin to understand what the inspiration behind some of the uses of this particular symbol may be. In order to understand this concept, we first have to look at this symbol, because this symbol is also called the cloven hoof or the devil's footprint, and we would also call this the pentagram. The pentagram itself will be discussed in a later video. For our purposes here, we will simply talk about part of this symbol, which I believe we see repeated in corporate logos and other symbols used by other entities. So we'll notice that if we break down this symbol, you can look at the goat's head. This symbol is also called the goat of Mendes, which was made famous by Eliphas Levi, this man, back in the 1800s. And he was an occultist. He thought that it would be a good idea to place a goat within an inverted pentagram, because an inverted pentagram is the shape of a goat's head. But like I say, we'll cover this in a later video. But for our purposes here, I want you to notice the section of this pentagram which contains the goat's face and the horns, because that's what I think is represented in these symbols. This concludes video number 2, a continuation of the Ouroboros in logos, and an examination of the cloven hoof in corporate's logos. Look for video 3. Welcome to parts 3 of Understanding Corporate's Logos. This video will examine pyramids, triangles, logos which seem to be based upon these designs. But in order to understand why someone would want to use this in their logo, we must first understand this symbol, which appears on the back of the dollar bill. Now, in order to properly understand this symbol, you must understand a few things about ancient Egypt and about the person or persons who played a part in placing this symbol on the back of the dollar bill, namely Henry Wallace, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Nicholas Roerich. I'm not going to discuss the details of that in this video, but I would tell you that if you are interested in this, a simple internet search on these people can yield much results, especially when it comes to beginning to understand how they understood the ancient sun god Horus and what this meant to them and why it seems to be represented above the truncated pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. Let's get into the subject of this study. In order to do that, in order for us to even begin, we have to understand, as I said, a little bit about ancient Egypt. If you remember back to video 1, which talked about the Ouroboros, how it represents cycles of time and a returning back to certain points in time, then you'll be able to connect that with this concept of Egypt. And so there are many who would like to return back to the rule under a world empire, with themselves being in control of that world empire, of course, so that they can benefit. So what does the pyramid have to do with this concept of a world empire that I keep mentioning? It's important for us to understand that in ancient Egypt, the people saw their political leader, the pharaoh, as a manifestation of God. So if we just lay this out flat on the table and keep it simple, what the pyramid then can represent to some people is an idea that they can be like a god, that they can be like God, because the Great Pyramid in Egypt was built for the pharaoh Khufu, and again, he thought of himself as a god, and so did the people. This was their political leader who was supposed to take care of them. So that's, in its simplest form, that's really all it means. So for us to look at the back of the dollar bill and see that triangle with the eye in it floating above an unfinished pyramid simply means that some people would like to install themselves in this world as our gods, and they would like to control us. So with that being said, let's look at some of these corporate logos, which I believe are a very clear representation of the pyramid in Egypt. And the pyramid in Egypt being linked to the concept of the Pharaoh who had total control over the population. I believe that there are many indications in the world today to show us that the politicians that many people think are acting on their behalf are actually making laws to make it easier for them to take our freedom away from us. But again, let's just look at the logos. Welcome to part 4 of Understanding Corporate Logos. In the previous videos we looked at the number 666, we looked at the Ouroboros, the cloven hoof, and pyramids. In this video we'll make an examination of pentagrams which appear in corporate logos and other symbols used by other entities, whether they be government or business. In order for us to have an appreciation for why the pentagram has become so famous as a occult symbol, it is additionally important for us to understand who made that symbol very popular. His name was Eliphas Levi, and I mentioned him in a previous video. Let's examine this man more closely. So we will pick up this deeper examination of Eliphas Levi in the year 1853 when he visited England. There he met a novelist, a Rosicrucian novelist. It seems that he then became influenced by this man, Edward Bulwer Lytton. Rosicrucianism is where Christianity and ancient mystery religions are attempted to be intermingled. So a Rosicrucian, for example, would, in a very broad sense, believe the things that are written in the Bible, but at the same time they would also be able to be very interested in practicing many facets of the mystery religions. Levi's first book that he wrote on magic appeared in 1854 under the title of Transcendental Magic, Its Doctrine and Ritual. But it's very telling in what Mr. Levi writes in some of the opening lines of the theme of occultism, and it gives us some insight as to what he understood about occultism. Here's what he says: behind the veil of all the erratic and mystical allegories of ancient doctrines, behind the darkness and strange ordeals of all initiations, under the seal of all sacred writings, in the ruins of Nineveh or Thebes, on the crumbling stones of old temples, and on the blackened visage of the Assyrian or Egyptian Sphinx, in the monstrous or marvelous paintings which interpret to the faithful of India the inspired pages of the Vedas, in the cryptic emblems of our old books on alchemy, in the ceremonies practiced at reception by all secret societies, there are found indications of a doctrine which is everywhere the same and everywhere carefully concealed. So what he tells us in that quote is that all of these ancient religions and the secret societies which presently incorporate the symbols used by those ancient mystery religions, that the symbols represent something which they find very important, something which is so important that it is carefully concealed, as he says. At this point, it's important to note that those who practiced those religions in ancient times ultimately worshipped nature, and the patterns that they saw in nature they used to convey certain ideas and concepts, beliefs that they had which related to the particular religion that they practiced. So, for example, if somebody saw a pattern which was a naturally occurring pattern in nature, then they might incorporate that pattern as a symbol which would ultimately convey a mysterious hidden idea something that was very important to the religion and to the people who practiced the religion. And by now, it is known through centuries of scientific study that Venus has a lot of retrograde motion as it goes around the sun, which means that it moves differently than the other planets do. And if you look at a pattern of Venus's movement around the sun, after about an 8-year cycle of movement around the sun, Venus forms a pentagram, or something that is similar to the shape of a pentagram. So, if we bring that back to what the pentagram might mean to some people, it simply conveys an idea, and I think that we're going to find that the idea conveyed by this symbol is very sinister, because the planet Venus is at its brightest just before sunrise and just after sunset. It is often called the morning star. So, to get back to the original point of inquiry in this video, what might the pentagram signify to some people? Just as the planet Venus is the brightest planet or star in the early morning and early evening, some people view Satan as a source of light, a bright light, a source of illumination and knowledge, and that is why they worship him in secret and in secret societies. So with that in mind, let's view some of the corporate logos which may have this significance attached to them. Welcome to part 5 of Understanding Corporate Logos. In this particular installment, we are going to look at what is called the third eye, and as we go through this video, I'm going to discuss what that means to some people and how it also is connected with another concept called the chakra. In Eastern religions, the chakra simply refers to a belief that there are certain points on the human body that are kind of like a reflection into the spiritual realm. So what I mean by that is that in some Eastern beliefs, people believe that they can tap into the spiritual realm by manipulating and perhaps controlling some parts of the physical body. An example of this would be tapping into the power of the pineal gland. The pineal gland is often referred to as the third eye. What the third eye is simply this concept that since the pineal gland is in the center of the brain, it has some sort of mystical, metaphysical influence. And for those of you who do not know what metaphysics is simply a study of going beyond the physical realm. So an easier way to describe this is that metaphysics is simply a study of things, a study of concepts. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with any particular religion, but someone who studies metaphysics is simply a student who is experimenting, you might say. What does that have to do with corporate logos, you might ask yourself? If you look at many of the corporate logos which we recognize because we perhaps see them on a daily basis or are at least fairly familiar with them, you will notice that many of the corporate logos in America and abroad seem to incorporate this concept of an eye. And this video, I want you to know, is simply my opinion. It's my take on what I believe this means. I know that some people would say that, well, you know, the eye in these logos refers to the Egyptian god Horus or something like that. And I don't know, maybe that is true, but for my opinion, I believe it refers to the third eye. And those who are familiar with this concept, some people may say, well, let these people just believe in their third eye. Really, I am willing to do that until it comes to a point where perhaps that's simply the explanation given to the masses, that through tapping into the pineal gland or the chakra, you will ascend to a higher level of spiritual awareness, when in fact, perhaps a core criminal element believes that this third eye or this chakra concept doesn't really refer to spiritual enlightenment, but it refers to them ascending above everyone else on the planet so that they can control them through many levels of shifting and changing mental conditioning. I believe that if we look at our society, and especially Hollywood, this becomes readily apparent. There indeed are people who would like to control and manipulate the masses. So for those people, maybe this whole concept of the third eye refers to an ascension above all of the other people on the planet. And in the meantime, they tell all of these people that the third eye or the chakra really only refers to spiritual enlightenment, and perhaps originally that was what it meant, but I don't think it would be a far cry to suggest that some people may have adopted that concept for themselves and perhaps changed the meaning. So, having said all of that, let's just take a look at these corporate logos with all of these eyes that we see on a daily basis and ask yourself the question, what might it mean to a small group of elite people who have the money that comes from these corporations? And what can they do with that money? Can they affect society with that money that they receive from you buying their goods and services? Just ask yourself that question, because I think you will soon realize that the answer is yes, they probably could control and manipulate some areas of society. So let's take a look.